He hadn't seen the house in 10 years. Yet when Ethan Ward stepped from the taxi, the air carried the same scent of salt and wet pine that clung to his childhood. The sea hissed beyond the cliffs, whispering of things left unsaid. The porch light flickered as if recognizing him, and for one brief second, he thought he saw his father's silhouette framed in the window. But ghosts don't wait in doorways. Only the living do. And Margaret Ward, standing there with her hands folded, looked like a memory pretending to breathe. He smiled, unsure whether to embrace or apologize. "You came back," she said softly, and beneath her calm tone was something else. Relief. Or fear. The kind that builds when the truth you've hidden too long begins to stir again. The morning came gray and heavy. The kind that makes even the sea seem tired. Ethan woke to the echo of gulls and the scent of coffee drifting up the stairs. His mother was already moving through her quiet rituals, as if no decade had passed. The walls carried the faint tick of the grandfather clock. Each second, a reminder that time here didn't flow. It circled. He walked the familiar hallway, fingers brushing old wallpaper, feeling every year he'd tried to forget. In the kitchen, Margaret hummed softly, eyes avoiding his. It wasn't distance that divided them, it was the unspoken. Something in her voice that trembled every time she said, "It's good to have you home." Outside, the town felt smaller than memory allowed. The docks were quieter, the boats fewer, and the people older. Ethan walked along the pier, every face a half-familiar ghost. Clara Reeves spotted him first, her hair tied in a loose bun, camera hanging at her neck. She laughed softly, a sound both surprised and cautious. Years hadn't erased what lingered between them. They had only deepened the space where words used to live. "You really came back," she said. "Didn't think you'd ever face this place again." He smiled faintly, eyes tracing the water. "Neither did I." That evening, rain returned, drumming softly on the porch roof. Ethan explored the parlor, drawn to the smell of old wood and ash. He noticed a drawer slightly ajar. Inside, a letter opener engraved with his father's initials. The handle was polished from use, but the blade was stained faintly dark, like something time hadn't fully erased. Margaret appeared behind him, her voice brittle. "Some things shouldn't be dug up," she murmured. He turned, startled by her tone. "Maybe some things shouldn't have been buried," he replied. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Before sleep, Ethan stood by his bedroom window, the sea whispering through cracked panes. The upstairs hallway groaned under shifting wind, but somewhere beneath the sound was a softer rhythm, like footsteps. He held his breath, listening. The house seemed alive, remembering him in every creak. Across the hall, the locked study door shimmered faintly under moonlight. He tried the handle once more, unmoving. The chill that passed through him wasn't from the cold. It was recognition, the feeling that whatever waited behind that door had been waiting for him all along. The morning mist hung over the cliffs like a veil drawn by unseen hands. Ethan walked the narrow path toward the old town, the sound of waves echoing beneath. Every turn carried ghosts. The bench where his father once read to him, the tree he'd carved his initials into before leaving. He felt like a trespasser in his own memory. The town square was quieter now. The bakery shuttered, the fountain dry, but the air still smelled of salt and sugar, childhood sweetness laced with decay. When Clara appeared behind him, camera in hand, her smile wavered with familiarity. "Still trying to outrun ghosts?" she teased softly. He answered, "Not anymore. I think they've caught up." They stopped at the cafe near the harbor, the one that had once been their secret refuge from the world. Inside, everything was smaller. The counter cracked. The clock stopped at 3:17. Clara ordered black coffee. Ethan tea, just as before. Silence did most of the talking. "Your mother wrote to me once," Clara said suddenly, "after you left. She said the house didn't feel right without you." Ethan frowned, unsure whether to be comforted or unsettled. She never mentioned that. Clara hesitated, her eyes lowering. There are a lot of things she doesn't mention. The words hung between them like the scent of old smoke. That evening, Ethan returned home with his thoughts spinning like loose pages in a storm. Margaret sat knitting by the fire, her movements slow and deliberate. "You saw Clara," she said without looking up. It wasn't a question. Ethan's voice was careful. "She said you wrote to her after I left." Margaret's hands froze mid-motion. The yarn trembled, then dropped. "I didn't want you to forget what home felt like," she whispered. The flames crackled louder, as if mocking their restraint. For a long time, neither spoke, the air thick with all the words they didn't know how to say. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan wandered the hallways. The floorboards groaned beneath his bare feet, and somewhere, the wind whispered through unseen cracks. He paused at the family photographs lining the wall, birthdays, Christmas mornings, a life frozen in perfect smiles. But one frame caught his eye, a photo of his parents by the half-built boat. The date beneath was scratched away. Behind it, hidden between cardboard and glass, was another picture, his father alone, standing on the same dock, eyes hollow, sea raging behind him. Ethan's breath caught. He turned the frame over, heart pounding, as if the house itself had just confessed something. Ethan confronted his mother the next morning, his voice sharper than he intended. "Why was that photo hidden?" he asked. Margaret hesitated, teacup trembling in her grip. "Because some memories don't belong in the light," she said quietly. Her words struck like confession. He looked broken, Mother. "What happened to him before he died?" She stared into her tea, eyes glistening. "Your father carried things no one should carry. And I let him." Ethan's jaw tightened. The truth wasn't just hiding. It was waiting to be found. And now it had begun to bleed through the cracks. The storm came without warning, rain slamming against the old house like the past demanding entry. Ethan sat awake in his father's study, the only light a flickering desk lamp. The room smelled of old paper, salt, and dust. He traced his fingers across the shelves, pulling down a weathered ledger that fell open to reveal brittle letters tucked inside. The handwriting was unmistakable. His father's. The first line read, "I cannot keep pretending this house is whole." Ethan's pulse quickened as he unfolded another letter, this one signed with a name he didn't recognize. Lightning flashed, and for an instant, the shadow of a man seemed to move across the wall behind him. By morning, Ethan hadn't slept. The letters were spread across the table like wounds reopened. Some spoke of debts, others of guilt. But one name kept returning, A. Reeves. He froze. Reeves. Clara's last name. His stomach tightened as he realized what it implied. Could it be her father? Her mother? He read the next page slowly, words blurring as the truth crept closer. She knows. I cannot live with it much longer. The ink bled at the edges as if even the paper couldn't hold the weight of the confession. Outside, the sky was heavy with gray, mirroring the dread gathering in his chest. Ethan found Clara at the cliffs, photographing the breaking waves. He held the letter in his trembling hand. "Clara," he called. She turned, smiling at first. Then, seeing his face, her smile fell. "Did you know your father and mine?" He couldn't finish. Clara stepped closer, wind tangling her hair, fear flickering behind her eyes. "My mother told me once," she whispered, "that your father came to her before he died. I didn't believe her. I didn't want to." The storm wind howled between them. Two families bound by a secret neither chose. "I need to know everything," Ethan said. Clara nodded, tears blurring her vision. "Then be ready to hate me too." That night, Margaret found Ethan in the hallway, staring at his father's old portrait. "You've been in the study," she said quietly. He didn't answer. "There are things you shouldn't read." Her voice wavered, breaking the calm she'd fought to keep for years. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, tears forming, but refusing to fall. "Because your father was broken, and I wanted you to remember him whole," she said. "He betrayed us, Mother. You let me worship a lie." Margaret's eyes hardened. "Love isn't a lie, Ethan. It's what's left after the truth burns everything else away." Her words hung in the dark like smoke from a dying fire. When night deepened, Ethan returned to the study with the last key he found hidden in his father's toolbox. The lock turned with a reluctant click. Inside the small cabinet lay a stack of sketches, blueprints for the boat his father never finished, and beneath them, a sealed envelope marked for Ethan. His breath faltered as he tore it open. The handwriting trembled across the page. "I could not protect you from the truth, so I buried it beneath silence." Ethan pressed the letter to his chest, the storm's rumble outside sensing with his heartbeat. Somewhere a floorboard creaked, and for the first time he didn't flinch. The past was no longer hiding. It was speaking. The storm passed by morning, but the silence it left behind felt heavier. Ethan stood on the porch, the letter still folded in his pocket. Down the hill, Sheriff Miles Rowan's truck sat parked near the docks. The same man who'd come to their house 10 years ago with the news of his father's accident. Now Ethan could no longer hear that word without flinching. He walked toward the truck, each step pressing into soaked earth. Rowan looked up from his thermos, eyes narrowing. "Didn't expect to see you back," he said. "I've got questions about my father," Ethan replied. The sheriff sighed, staring out at the restless water. "Then you'd better be ready for answers that don't forgive." Inside the sheriff's office, the air smelled of paper, metal, and rain-soaked leather. Rowan rummaged through an old filing cabinet, his movements slow, deliberate. "Your father's case was closed quick," he said. "Too quick. Your mother wanted it that way." Ethan's jaw clenched. "She told me it was an accident." Rowan paused, pulling a faded file marked Ward, Daniel. He placed it on the desk between them. It wasn't. There was a note found in his workshop, but your mother made it disappear before the coroner saw it. Ethan's heart dropped. "You kept a copy?" Rowan nodded once. "I shouldn't have, but I knew this day would come." Rowan read aloud, voice trembling slightly. "Forgive me, Margaret. I am tired of pretending the sea can wash away what I've done." The silence that followed seemed to stretch beyond the room. Ethan stared at the page, his father's handwriting swimming before his eyes. "Why didn't you stop her from hiding it?" he whispered. Rowan met his gaze, shame etched into his features. "Because she was breaking too. And I thought protecting her was the same as protecting you." The clock ticked once, loud as thunder. "I was wrong." Ethan took the note, folding it carefully. "You all were." Leaving the station, Ethan drove to the cliffs where his father's boat had been found. The sky hung low and bruised, wind tugging at his coat. He imagined the scene 10 years earlier. The wreckage, the crowd, his mother's pale face refusing to cry. For the first time, he saw it clearly. Not an accident, but surrender. The truth pressed against him, heavy but sharp. He knelt by the edge, fingers brushing the wet rocks. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered to the sea. A single gull screamed overhead, lost in the wind. The world offered no answer. Only waves crashing like the sound of someone breathing their last. When Ethan returned home that night, Margaret was waiting at the dining table, a single candle burning between them. "You saw Rowan," she said quietly. He nodded. "He told me everything." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look surprised. "Then you know your father didn't die by chance." Ethan's voice broke. "You could have told me." She looked down at her hands trembling against the tablecloth. "I wanted you to have a father worth remembering." Tears slipped silently down his cheeks. "And now I don't know which hurts more, losing him or losing the story you built to protect me." Margaret whispered. "Both were built from love. one just had sharper edges. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a body exhaling its final truth. Ethan couldn't sit still. The sound of the wind in the chimney, the ticking of the clock, the creak of the stairs, everything whispered fragments of what had learned. His father's guilt, his mother's silence, his own disbelief. He climbed the attic steps, the floorboards complaining beneath his weight. Boxes, old trunks, tools, the remnants of a life half kept. And then he found it, a small key nailed under the workbench, wrapped in oilcloth. His pulse quickened. He knew the door it belonged to, the one that had been locked since the night his father died. He stood before the locked door at the end of the hall, the key cold in his palm. For 10 years, that door had been forbidden, sealed under the weight of his mother's silence. Now, it seemed to breathe faintly in the darkness. When the lock finally turned, the sound was softer than he expected, almost merciful. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and memory. The room was small, window covered by cloth, filled with sketches, journals, and a faint scent of turpentine. His father's world, untouched. A desk stood in the corner, a stack of papers resting beneath a half-finished model of a boat. Ethan whispered, "What were you building, Dad?" Knowing the answer had nothing to do with wood. As he leafed through the notebooks, Ethan's eyes traced the steady collapse of a man trying to make sense of guilt. Notes blurred into confessions. The sea is not punishment, it is mercy. Another page. If she forgives me, maybe the tide will stop calling my name. Ethan's hands shook as he read. He turned to the final entry, written days before his father's death. Clara's mother knows. Margaret knows. Ethan must never. He pressed his palm to the ink as though touch could undo time. The realization struck. The betrayal wasn't an affair of passion, but of protection. His father had discovered something darker than love, and it had broken him beyond repair. Margaret found him hours later, still in the locked room, surrounded by papers. "You weren't meant to see this," she said, voice thin, eyes rimmed red. "Then why leave the key?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "Because I knew one day you'd stop believing me." She stepped closer, fingers trembling as she reached for one of the letters. "He wasn't a bad man, Ethan. He just couldn't live with what he'd done." Ethan's breath shuddered. "He loved someone else?" She shook her head slowly. "No. He loved us too much. He blamed himself for what happened that night on the cliffs." The words hit him like cold water. "You mean he didn't fall?" Margaret looked away. He jumped to keep the truth buried. As dawn bled across the sea, Ethan stood by the window of the study, the final letter in his hand. His father's handwriting trembled across the page. "Tell him I built something that could carry him farther than I could." He looked down at the model boat. Solace. Its hull unfinished, its sails folded like wings, waiting to open. Behind him, Margaret lingered in the doorway, tears catching in the morning light. "He wanted to build a way out," she whispered. "He thought forgiveness could float." Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe it still can." He turned to her then, eyes red but steady, and for the first time in years, they didn't look away from each other. The house was silent except for the sea's steady breathing through the open window. Ethan hadn't slept. The truth pressed against his chest like a weight he couldn't set down. Margaret moved through the kitchen in her morning ritual. Boiling water, setting cups, pretending everything still followed the rhythm of before. He entered quietly, placing the letter on the table between them. "No more secrets," he said. Her hands froze above the kettle. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then, softly, "He didn't mean for you to find it." Ethan's reply came like a tremor. "And you didn't mean for me to forgive him?" The kettle whistled. Neither moved to stop it. Margaret sat slowly, as if the weight of her memories might shatter the chair beneath her. "The night he died," she began. "There was an argument, not about love, but about truth. He found out something. something that made him believe he'd ruined us. Her voice broke. Ethan leaned forward. What did he do? She swallowed hard. There was a fire on the cliffs that night. Clara's mother was there. He tried to save her, but she fell. He blamed himself. Thought people would say it was an affair. I told him it didn't matter, but he couldn't live with it. Ethan's chest tightened, so he jumped. Margaret's eyes filled. He let the sea take him before shame could. The air between them thickened. Ethan rose, pacing, each step an echo of every year, lost to silence. You let me believe it was an accident. You let me bury a man who didn't even want to live. Margaret flinched, tears streaking her face. I was trying to save you, she cried. From what? He shouted. From him! From the truth. Her sob broke open something raw inside them both. From becoming him, she whispered. You have his heart, Ethan. That same storm. I couldn't watch it destroy you too. Her words cracked the anger in him. He sank to his knees, the space between them closing, both of them trembling. Two survivors of the same wreck. The storm inside the house eased into stillness. Margaret reached for Ethan's hand. Tentative, uncertain, but real. I kept the house the same so you'd have something that didn't change, she said. I thought if I could preserve it, maybe I could preserve him too. Ethan squeezed her fingers gently. You preserved the pain, Mother. That's what survived. Her lips quivered. And now, he looked toward the window, the morning sun breaking through clouds for the first time in days. Now we let it go, he said. All of it. For the first time, she didn't resist. Her shoulders fell as if she'd been holding her breath for 10 years. That evening, Ethan stood alone on the porch, watching the sea dissolve into twilight. Behind him, Margaret moved quietly through the house, opening windows that had been shut for years. Curtains breathed for the first time in a decade. The air smelled of salt and freedom. Ethan closed his eyes and let the wind hit his face, neither angry nor afraid anymore. The truth hadn't healed him, but it had given his pain a shape, one he could finally carry without breaking. From inside, his mother's voice drifted faintly. Dinner's ready. He turned, eyes wet but peaceful, and stepped through the door. Not into the past, but something new. Dawn crept softly over the cliffs, brushing the sea in muted gold. Ethan carried the small model boat, solace in his hands, its wooden hull polished smooth. By sleepless nights, the air was cold, sharp with salt and memory. He reached the edge where his father's footprints had last been seen a decade ago. The sea below breathed slowly, as if waiting. He placed the model on the rocks, unfolded the letter one last time, and whispered, You can rest now. The wind caught the words and carried them out over the waves. In that moment, Ethan felt something lift inside him. Not forgiveness, but understanding. A peace shaped like surrender. He lit the final letter with a match, watching the flame consume his father's words. The paper curled and blackened, rising in soft embers that vanished into the wind. For years he had carried his father's silence like a wound. Now the silence felt different, not empty, but complete. The sea below shimmered with reflected fire, as if acknowledging the release. Ethan whispered, You built something that carried me farther than you ever could. The wind howled once, then quieted. In that stillness, he imagined Daniel Ward's voice carried faintly through the surf. Then keep sailing. When Ethan returned home, Margaret was waiting on the porch, wrapped in her shawl. She didn't ask where he'd been. She already knew. He handed her the model boat. He built this for us, he said softly. She ran her fingers along the wood, smiling faintly through tears. He always said the sea was both punishment and forgiveness, she murmured. Maybe it was both. Ethan sat beside her. The house behind them was bright with morning, the air filled with the scent of coffee and rain. For the first time in years, they simply existed. Not mother and son bound by tragedy, but two people learning how to breathe again. Later that afternoon, Clara arrived at the house, camera slung across her shoulder. Ethan met her by the gate. No words were needed. She lifted her camera and took a single photograph. Ethan and Margaret standing in the doorway, the sea glimmering behind them. "For memory," she said, "not for pain." Ethan nodded, smiling faintly. "Make sure it remembers the light." She lowered her camera, eyes soft with understanding. "It already does." For the first time, Ethan realized that some stories weren't meant to be rewritten, only seen clearly at last. That night, the house glowed softly against the dark horizon. Ethan sat at his father's desk, a blank page before him. For years, the silence of this room had been a prison. Now, it felt like a promise. He dipped the pen into ink and began to write. For him, for her. For what's left when truth is all that remains. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of salt and renewal. Downstairs, Margaret hummed faintly, a sound of life continuing. The house no longer mourned. It breathed. And as Ethan looked toward the sea, he realized that sometimes the past doesn't die. It simply learns to live differently.